On Christmas Eve, you're either doing one of two things. You go out or you stay in, have a little party. And my family doesn't do 7 fishes. My family makes pasta. And in Bologna, there are 2 famous pastas. Tortellini In Brodo, which is basically synonymous with Christmas, and Tortellini alla Panna, another pasta made for festive occasions, just not usually for Christmas. One of them is goated and perfect. The other, in my opinion, needs a little help. Now there is precedent for combining 2 pastas in Italy. For example, pasta alla zazzona combines all 4 Roman pastas to create something new. And what I've come to determine is what's missing from tortellini alla panna is a little help from tortellini in brodo. Something to give the dish a little bit more of a Bologna identity, in my opinion. If you're Italian, I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the description. Otherwise, this video is sponsored by the National Pork Board, and it starts with fresh pasta. Now on Christmas Eve, we're home because we're prepping for Christmas Day. And it's a lot lower of a lift for us than Thanksgiving. But there's still stuff going on, so I'm gonna use my cheat to making pasta to make my life a little easier, take a little pressure off my wrists, is making it in a food processor. So we're starting with 5 large eggs, which should roughly equate to 258 grams of whole eggs. To that, I'm going to add 254 grams of 00 flour. It's that Italian flour that is ground up super fine. It's what you'll use when you're making a fresh egg dough. With a food processor, we can throw it all in there and it'll do most of the work, and we just gotta put a little bit of finishing touches at the end. I did drop this recently, so let's see if it works. That doesn't sound good. Now we just let it run on high until a ball begins to form inside of the food processor and the egg is fully absorbed by the flour. Lightly dust the board, watch the blade, and then watch this. We're gonna need this to make the filling. And then we just wanna start to knead the dough, and we're gonna determine if our hydration level is gonna work for us. I'm gonna take all these little crumbs, make sure I work it into the dough. Feel like it's kind of at the right level. So I'm gonna scrape that excess off to the side and just start to work it. And if I feel like it needs more flour, I have it next to me and I can start to work it in. But I'd rather have it too wet in the beginning than too dry, for sure. And so we're just gonna work the dough until it becomes a little craggly, seemingly a little dried out now. And we're gonna work it until it becomes nice and smooth, the gluten's developed, and we folded in a little bit of air. I can see it's pinching sealed on the bottom. That's a good sign to me of hydration. Now, I've kneaded it till it's much smoother, but we don't have to do all the work by hand. There's 2 ways to develop gluten. One is obviously by kneading, the other is with time. So if we do a little bit of kneading, then we do a little bit of resting, we're kind of getting the same result with half of the effort. So I'm just gonna take some plastic wrap, I'm gonna kind of pleat it around the circle or the ball of dough, get it nice and tight, and that's gonna create a nice humid environment for the dough to rest. We're gonna let it rest for 20 minutes. In that 20 minutes, that dough is gonna become softer, more hydrated, and easier to knead. And then we can give it one final knead to smooth it out before we let it rest and work on the rest. Now it's been about 20 minutes and we're gonna go ahead and start our second round of kneading. However, this time I'm gonna be a lot more gentler and I'm just gonna try and kind of smooth out that outside, get it nice and formed into a ball and shape it. At this stage, kneading it too hard might dry the dough out further. Just 3 to 5 minutes and that's all it'll need at this point. You see how much smoother that is? We've got some bounce back when we press into it, which means we're developing some gluten. And we're gonna rest it again for a longer period of time. And at that point, it'll become fully hydrated and ready to be used for pasta. This will need 2 hours resting at room temperature, and then you can begin to make this pasta, which gives you time to make the filling. However, I actually made a dough ahead of time. So this has been resting in the refrigerator for a full day, which means it is at its optimal hydration, which is important in making tortellini because they can easily dry out because you're doing so many little pasta shapes as fast as you can, which isn't easy depending on what skill level you're at. This has been resting in the fridge. This needs to come out of the fridge, come down to room temperature, let those eggs warm up before we can start making this into pasta. This is gonna go in our fridge, but again, 2 hours on the board and you can use this right away. So now we can work on the filling. Now this is a classic Bologna recipe. The filling of a tortellini is pretty standard when we're talking about a tortellini in brodo. It consists consists of about a 2-to-1 ratio of prosciutto di Parma, 2 parts of that to 1 part each of mortadella and some pork loin. I've got here a bone-in pork chop, and when shopping for pork chop, I look for the same way that I look for a steak. Nice marbleization, fat running through the meat. And for more tips on shopping for pork, visit pork.org. This is the only thing we're going to be cooking. To go with that, we've got Parmigiano Reggiano, a little white wine, an egg, some nutmeg, and a little bit of butter. So let's head on over to the stove to cook off the pork chop. Now I'm gonna preheat a medium-sized frying pan on medium-high heat, and I'm gonna season up that pork chop. Once the pan's hot, I'm gonna add a knob of butter, add the pork chop to the pan, and begin to sear on both sides. Give it a second on that first side, let that brown butter start to develop a crust, and then give it a flip. Keep it moving around to the hot spots on the pan, and once you flip and rotate a few times, get some color. We don't need a real hard crust like we would if we were serving this as a main course. We just want to get a little bit of browning, and then get that onto our little sizzle plate, pour that brown butter on top, get that into a 400-degree oven, and we're just gonna finish cooking that for anywhere between 5 to 7 minutes. Then we're gonna take that wine and we're gonna deglaze the pan, reduce that down by about half. Once it's slightly reduced, we can set that off to the side and wait for our pork chop to finish cooking. Now we can pull out our pork chop, and for flavorful, tender, and safe pork, I'm looking for the meat thermometer to reach 145 degrees with a 3-minute rest. You know, it's actually a misconception that pork must be cooked until the juices run clear and the meat is white. This is not true. With modern pork production, commercial retail pork is safe to eat when cooked to an internal temperature of 145 degrees with a 3-minute rest, which will result in a beautiful light blushing pink. And this is important information because the most delicious pork is not overcooked. For more on pork cooking temperature, visit pork.org/pork-cooking-temperature. 3 minutes is up. We're at 145. We're good to go. I'm gonna actually add those hand juices to the wine. We're gonna add all that to the filling. So I'm just gonna cut the meat off the bone. And we just wanna cut it into chunks. Nice juicy pork. Now add that back to the pan with all those juices. Then we can just dice up our mortadella. Once you got your mortadella diced up and your pork diced up, we're ready to make the filling. We gotta set up our half-broken food processor again. First, we're gonna go in with the pork. And add all those juices as well. Then I'm gonna go in with the mortadella. Basically the chunkiest stuff first. And then let that go until it's a smooth, almost puree. Now that that's broken up, we can start to add in the prosciutto. Get it kind of loose in there. The more we add to it, the harder it's gonna be to start to blend. I'll add the rest. So now that's kind of like, almost like a meatball, like a ground Bologna meatball. Gonna have to try that. So then we're gonna add in our 1 egg, a little nutmeg, which I don't love, so I add just a little bit. It does add a nice little warmth to it. Then I'm gonna let that go before adding the cheese. So now that egg helped kind of puree and emulsify everything into like a farce. It also loosened it up a bit, but we're gonna add the cheese now, which should kind of combine it all back together. I'm gonna add about 1 cup Parmigiano Reggiano. Another classic ingredient of Bologna, which is what this dish is about. It's all of what Bologna and the region is known for. See, the thing about this is once you smell it, that is the smell of Italy. So many of Italy's distinguishing food qualities live in this dish. I'm gonna clean up the sides one more time, give it one more blitz, make sure everything is nicely mixed. And there you have one of the most classic ripieno or stuffings for a pasta in Italy. This is the heart of our tortellini. So we're gonna let this go into the fridge and it's gonna kind of solidify with some of that butter and fat in there. It's gonna make it easier for us to fill the pasta. Now we're ready to start making some tortellini. However, we're gonna work on the tortellini in brodo aspect of this recipe, which is going to be taking the brodo of tortellini and reducing it down to a demi-glaze. Sticky, glazy, drizzled on top of the cream pasta. That's my vision of how to combine these two, which I think elevates tortellini alla panna with the help of tortellini in brodo. But we need to reduce this, so I'm gonna get this into a pot and get it reducing. It is the holidays. If you're home right now, you've probably got some sort of stock on the stove cooking. Feel free to use that as well. Just gonna bring it up to a boil, Let it reduce. And if you need a brodo recipe, I have one on the channel. I'll leave linked down in the description. So now we've got our dough. It's nice and pliable. It's soft. It's hydrated, which we need if we're gonna make a lot of tortellini. That's what good dough looks like. I don't need to work with all of this. And in fact, I'm only gonna make a portion for myself right now. I'm gonna cut the dough in half. You got some air pockets worked into the dough. That's good, that's what you want. They're not too big, they're nice and small. I'm happy with that. So what I wanna do is work with a quarter of the dough at a time. I especially recommend that because if you're just starting out making tortellini, you can't make them fast. To prevent them from drying out, the secret is to make them slow, but in small batches. I'm gonna take this piece of dough, I'm gonna just flatten it out, try and get it as flat and as even as possible, and then stretch it to the shape you want it at the end. Just helps keep its shape a little better. Now we can roll this through the pasta machine. We're gonna start at the widest setting, which on my pasta maker is 0. We're gonna run it through, and then every time we run it through, increase the setting by 1 notch until we get to what I think is the perfect thickness for this, which is the 7th setting on this machine. Now we're just gonna cut that in half. Now I've got what's called a bicicletta, a bicycle tool, which is gonna cut it. It's measured to about 1.5 inches. 1 to 2 inches is the right square for tortellini. So I'm gonna just start to make the squares. Pull off any excess, start cutting it the long way, see how many rows I can get horizontally. Same way, but then going the opposite way to form the squares. Just get as many pieces as you can. Once I have them cut, right on top with some plastic. That's gonna keep them moist. Worst case scenario is you have a little squirt bottle, you give them a mist, that'll help hydrate them a bit, help them to seal, but you just really wanna keep them as hydrated as I can once they're in this state. Realizing I should also get a pot of water up to the boil as well. And now we've got our filling. It's kind of hardened, it's kind of like Play-Doh-y. And then I've got a sheet tray with some semolina flour on it. That's the flour I just like to use to store my formed pastas in. So first up, I'm gonna form my filling into like almost like a little bit of a log, just to help me portion the amount of filling I add to each one. Then I'm gonna take one, feels tiny bit dry, so hit it with a little bit of water. Add a piece of filling like that, fold end to end like that, seal the sides, crimp the sealed edge, wrap around the finger, and seal. It's a perfect little tortellini right there. Place this right on the sheet tray. Now really, I'm assuming you got family around right now. It's Christmas Eve. It's dinner time, maybe all the prep has been done. This is when you get people together. You get a little conveyor belt of tortellini making going on. Even if there's no skill involved, some person can put the filling onto the tortellini. Whoever's got the method down can form the tortellini. You get all hands on deck, and that's what the holidays are all about. You screw them up, so what? Use it as an opportunity to learn how to do something and to implement a new tradition into your holidays. And I can tell you with certainty, the only way to get better at making tortellini is to practice making tortellini. I actually find once you get over the stress of figuring out how to make a pasta shape, it really just becomes fun and therapeutic. So now we've got perfect little tortellini. We've got our broth reducing for our demi-glace. Water's boiling. All we need is some heavy cream and some Parmigiano Reggiano. We're gonna wrap this up. Now let's check on our brodo, which is reducing nicely. We really wanna just let that reduce by about 90%. Once the brodo becomes like a syrupy consistency, once you see lots and lots of bubbles forming across the top surface of the brodo, that's when you know you're close. Almost the same way like a caramel would work. Once it's fully reduced, then we can take a knob of butter and off the heat, slowly melt that in. It's gonna create a little bit more of a saucy consistency. It's gonna thicken it up a little bit and almost give it like a caramel color and consistency, but it is like an intense syrupy flavor of chicken and beef. You don't need a lot. If you were making this for a few more people, I might double that recipe. Now our pasta water's boiling. We can season it with salt and we can drop in our tortellini. Give them a stir, and then off to the side in a little saute pan, we can add in about 3/4 of a cup to a cup of heavy cream. We're gonna cook the tortellini for about 2 to 3 minutes until they begin to boil, and I like to give them about 30 seconds to a minute more just to make sure those sealed edges get completely cooked. Then we can fish them out and transfer them to the cream, bringing in a little bit of that pasta water, and we can turn the heat up and begin to reduce that cream by about half. We want the cream to be thickened, but we don't want it too thick that when we add cheese, it's gonna gloop all the way up. So add enough pasta water as needed to make that cream nice and glossy. Once it's reduced, we're gonna kill the heat, stir it up a little bit just to cool the whole mixture down before we can sprinkle in our Parmigiano Reggiano. And once we add that and toss it into the mix, that's gonna help that sauce cling to the tortellini. It's not gloopy, it's nice and glossy, smooth, and beautiful. Now we can take those tortellinis and we can fill the bottom of a bowl with them. Then on top, we're gonna take the reduced Brodo demi-glaze, drape it across all those little tortellini so you get a little bit of that intense flavor in every bite. Combining these two pastas results in what I believe to be a mind-blowing improvement on Bologna's beloved tortellini alla panna. And instead of having to choose whether you have tortellini in brodo or tortellini in panna, now you can enjoy them both at the same time. Ooh. It is the perfect combination of the two pastas. Rich, creamy, intensity of all of those flavors of Bologna. It's comforting, it feels holiday to me. It's my Christmas Eve pasta. I want to thank the National Pork Board for sponsoring this video. If you want to learn more about pork, visit pork.org. Link's going to be down in the description. Recipe for this is going to be linked down in the description. You'll also be able to find it in my holiday plan of attack. That's all that I have today. Take care of yourself and go feed yourself.